Saw is an interesting series to look back on, because despite having many elements and traditions it has clung to like a limpet over the years, it is a franchise that constantly tries to develop itself and move forward. Every Saw film was made with a particular intention. Saw 2, for example, was made to shed light on Jigsaw's motive now that we know who he's supposed to be, and Jigsaw was made to give a new, modern apprentice under the Jigsaw moniker to potentially kickstart the series anew after the events of Saw 7. Although that never came to pass due to the minor issue that Jigsaw was, terrible. But of all the Saw movies made with a clear objective, Saw 3 had without a doubt the most challenging one, because Saw 3 was originally intended to be the end of the Saw franchise. While production decisions made at the last minute ensured more Saw films would get made, Saw 3 was written largely with the intention of finishing off the Saw series on a high note, and that left it with an absolute mountain to climb. It both had to raise the stakes from the last two Saw films with more brutal traps and kills than the prior two, and provide a satisfying narrative payoff for characters like Amanda and John, who we've been seeing grow over the past couple of years. That's a tall order demanding two things that aren't necessarily related, and I'd argue Saw 3 succeeds at exactly one of these things. I've always seen Saw 3 as a film of two distinct halves that run concurrently to one another. The Amanda plot, where Lynn and Amanda are working together to save John's life, and the Trap plot, where first Allison Kerry and then Jeff Denlon are taken through a variety of Jigsaw's games, featuring some of the all-time best traps in Saw history. The Amanda plot is absolutely top tier, with some of the strongest character moments in the whole Saw series, but the Trap plot is less successful. Slow-ass motherfucking Jeff is easily the weakest protagonist of Saw's first three installments, and despite some inventive traps, it just fails to be as compelling as its predecessors, and even begins to showcase some of the flaws that we'd see more clearly manifesting in Saw's later sequels. And similar to how I split my Saw 10 video into 3 parts, this video will be split into 2, taking apart what makes the best and worst of Saw 3 shine or shit the bed, to understand why Saw 3 is such a unique entry in the series. But before I go on, I should need to do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, I'm sorry about all this fair use bullshit. This is similar to my Saw 10 video situation where YouTube's gotten really harsh on my copyright control as of late. I've tried so many other ways to try and get this video up, but no matter what I do, it ends up getting blocked in like 80% of the world. And this time around, I can't even do what I did with Saw 10 and upload it all to Patreon instead, because Patreon has actually limited the size of the file uploads I'll take now. So when I cover Saw 4, I'm going to do my best to try to fix this and try and figure out another way of doing things, because this is getting really frustrating now, and I'm sorry that this is probably annoying you as well. So yeah, I hope this doesn't impinge your enjoyment of the video too much. Let's start with the trap plot, because Saw 3 in theory has a really solid trap plot lined up that follows in the trend of its incredibly successful and influential predecessor, Saw 2. Saw 2 kickstarted the trial method that almost every Saw film in the series would go on to replicate. A group of people are led through a series of games that all take place sequentially in one location, with some sort of central puzzle to solve, such as the nerve gas house in Saw 2, with the central puzzle being the antidote safe persisting throughout the trial. Saw 3 has a similar location repurposed into a long continuous trial, the Gideon meatpacking plant, which Dead by Daylight players might be able to recognise if you just mentally Photoshop a palette into every shot in the film. But while the bulk of the trap plot takes place here, there's a couple of traps that take place outside the meat plant before the trial proper begins, in the same vein of the Venus flytrap that opens Saw 2. Troy's classroom trap and Kerry's angel trap very much set the tone for the traps of Saw 3, and they showcase an increased attention to theatrically inflicting suffering compared to Saw 2. Let's compare Michael's trap in Saw 2 to Troy's trap in Saw 3 to show you what I mean here. Michael's trap is very similar in concept to the reverse bear trap, a head-mounted device that brutally kills you if you don't extract the key from someone's body in time. But it's worth remembering just how surprisingly ungory Michael's death in the Venus flytrap is. The concept is horrifying. Having to cut your own eye out with a scalpel to not have your head crunched is peak Saw, really. But he doesn't even really get in there with the scalpel, and the kill itself is minimally bloody and gory. Especially when compared to later deaths like Jonas, Xavier or Obby, it's pretty restrained by all accounts. Troy's trap on the other hand is agonising from the get-go. Waking up with those rings and chains through your body is horrifying enough in itself, much less the fact that you have to pull them out to escape the trap if you don't want to get nail-bombed to death. The process of escape and the death are also more visibly discomforting and gory. Saw 2's opening trap is tense, but Saw 3's is outright agonising, and this showcases how much more focused on pain and suffering Saw 3's traps are in comparison to the other two films so far. It feels much more mean-spirited this way, and it gives us a viscerally uncomfortable reminder of the depth of John Kramer's cruelty. Carrie's death in the Angel Trap is similarly mean-spirited, both because she's an established character we grew to care for over the course of the last two films, but also because she really did earn her freedom, only to be cheated out of it by Amanda rigging the game. While Saw 1 is a puzzle inviting you to solve it, and Saw 2 is a spectacle inviting you to be impressed by it, Saw 3 is broken glass in your sandwich inviting you to take a bite. Its traps are mean and ruthless even by Saw standards, and they're a good way to escalate the tension from the first two films with a more contraption-heavy focus than the prior installments. And for what it's worth, this is one element of the trap plot that remains excellent throughout the course of the film: the traps themselves. The rack, the pig vat, the freezer room, all of these traps are absolute all-time classics of the series that manage to hit the balance between being deliberate and cruel enough to make you uncomfortable, but not overly theatrical. The kind of thing that a sadistic mastermind with an engineering degree would build, as opposed to a production design department trying to get a good shot for a trailer because they're all so invasive of your body. The pig vat pouring offal down your throat, the rack physically twisting your body out of shape one limb at a time, the angel and classroom traps mutilating you more graphically than any other Saw trap so far. The fact that the girl in the freezer room has her naked body exposed to the elements. It maximises the victim's feeling of helplessness, which is doubled down on when some traps like the angel trap are shown to be inescapable. One of Saw 3's many tasks was to raise the stakes from the second film by designing a new suite of horrifying new traps, and in that they definitely succeeded. Probably the strongest collective suite of traps in any Saw film. They're all just so good. Saw 3's trap plot unfortunately brings the film down quite a bit, but the traps are absolutely not the reason why. The actual reason why is very simple. Jeff is a garbage protagonist. Jeff was clearly an attempt to replicate the formula that made flawed everymen like Eric Matthews and Lawrence Gordon work for their respective installments. Eric and Lawrence managed to straddle the line between being flawed enough people for John to take interest in them as Jigsaw, while still being sympathetic enough to root for them in their traps. And this was not easily done. In both cases, the depths of their skeeviness isn't shown to the viewer immediately from the get-go, meaning we have a fair bit of initial sympathy for them, even if we're aware of some of their flaws. From the start, we know Eric is a smug asshole who's rude to his son, so on some level we're prepared for something bad to happen to him, but we don't know that he planted evidence to get false convictions, or cheated on his wife until a little way into the film. Same goes for Gordon being a bit of a smug asshole who doesn't really appreciate his wife or daughter. We know he isn't perfect, but we don't know that he's an adulterer until about halfway through. Jeff takes that sympathy and tolerance the audience had of his predecessor's worst traits for granted. One of the first things that we see him do is mistreating his daughter Corbett because he's traumatised over the death of his son, which makes it much harder to get invested in his journey because, well, he abuses his daughter and he's not even shown to be particularly trying to be a good parent despite it. Even despite his failing marriage, Gordon is devoted to his daughter and Eric's rude to his son, but you can tell it's in part because he's frustrated at Daniel wasting his potential and talent and seemingly acting up intentionally just to spite him. But Corbett is younger than Daniel and has done nothing to deserve her father's treatment of her. If you want to create a character that we can kind of root for as he goes through his trials for a large portion of the film, a man whose one character trait is obsessively grieving to the point that he neglects everyone and everything else in his life, is not what I would call rootable. This is combined with the one flaw that most of the traps in Saw 3 have. While the suffering they inflict is very intimate, none of it is really designed to happen to Jeff. His personal stakes in the trap are extremely low. Helping the people in the trap doesn't really cost him or risk him much at all, so it makes his reluctance to do so outright painful to watch. It feels forced, like the only reason Jeff is holding back is because the filmmakers want to shoot a ton of painful suffering in the traps that they so carefully laboured over. The one everybody cites here is the pig vat trap. The only thing Jeff has to lose is his son's toys, which he puts in a furnace by pressing a button to stop the judge from drowning in a vat of pig offal. The fact that Jeff even hesitates, even almost refusing to do it at all, paints him in an exceptionally dislikable light and causes us as viewers to disengage with his struggle. We don't really care what happens to someone as consistently callous as Jeff, we have no reason to, and he's basically never in danger anyway. So what's the point of caring about his traps or his journey of growth? He doesn't really do anything. When Eric goes off the rails at John at the second act of Saw 2, we get invested in it because we know that Eric is failing his test, and are somewhat invested in his attempts to save his son, and repair their relationship, because we know in his heart, a repaired relationship with his son is all he ever wanted. What Jeff wants is much more nebulous. He's just an angry, mourning, neglectful man, and so really don't care about whatever it is he's doing to get back what he wants, which is made worse by the fact that Jeff doesn't really seem to care either. Dead Meat were really onto something when they called him slow-ass motherfucking Jeff. He ambles through the traps of Saw 3 in the Gideon meat plant with all the urgency of a dead snail and the drive and backbone of a bendy straw. To put it into perspective, while Jeff is going through 3 traps, each of which is resolved in a couple of minutes with no major risk to himself, Lynn is introduced to John, has several lengthy conversations with Amanda about John's condition and her chances of escape, stabilises John's condition, gets the tools she needs from Amanda and conducts a life-saving surgery on John with enough time for him to recover from the anaesthesia before Jeff gets to them. Saw 2 has a similar problem when there's a lot of time padding out the traps, but that time is spent opening sealed doors, dying from the nerve gas, trying to solve mysteries like the safe puzzle and the X marks the spot, figuring out why everyone has been taken and what ties them together. Saw 3 doesn't have a way to fill this downtime, which makes Jeff's sequence of games feel comically slow and doubles down on Jeff's lack of redeeming qualities or growth throughout the film to make him a thoroughly uninteresting POV character. He just feels like it's all boring to him, and that boredom is sadly contagious. So yeah, Jeff's a shitty character, and honestly I think it would have been a much more interesting film with Timothy Young as the lead. A young driver who caused the death of a child in a car accident, trying to make amends for what he did and driven through the games by that desire to be better and move on from the horrors that he inflicted. That would have been way better than a third dissatisfied dad without any of the charm of the last two. Helps that even for his brief time in the film, Koaho puts on a great performance that genuinely makes you feel for his predicament, to the point the rack might be one of the hardest traps to watch in Saw history. The choice of Jeff as the lead character of Saw 3's trap plot is hands down its weakest element. He's unpleasant and irritating to watch, which overshadows the genuinely compelling traps and performances he encounters on his way, and makes you want to skip through them to get to the good bits. Even by all accounts, some of the best made traps of any Saw film really should be the good bits. But the real meat of Saw 3 ironically isn't found in the pile of bodies and viscera, but in the second main plot of the film. John Kramer is dying, and his apprentice Amanda has kidnapped the disillusioned surgeon Lynn Denlon to save his life, at least prolonging it for a bit. Saw 3 might have some spectacular traps, but it's Amanda's story that will keep you glued to the screen. But for now I'd like to take a brief interlude from the painful horror of Saw 3 to show you something that's pretty much the opposite of pain and horror. Today's video sponsor, Extra Wallets. Today I'd like to show you the Extra Parliament Wallet. See this nice slim little design with a cash strap in there and a little button for all your cards. And if you look at the back, there's space for an RFID tracker as well. Link that up to your phone and you're able to find your wallet should you ever lose it. The Extra Parliament Wallet is stylish and durable in equal measure, and I can say that from personal experience. This is the Extra Parliament Wallet that I was sent 2 years ago, when they first sponsored a video on this channel. And I can say, everything really seems to be in order. Like, this wallet is functionally exactly the same as it was 2 years ago, works just as well as it ever did. So you can take it from me that Extra wallets are built to last. Be sure to grab one of Extra's safe, stylish and compact wallets or card holders in Extra's brand new Valentine's Day sale, where they get 20% off. And if you use my creator code PIXELBUSH or use the link in the description, you can get an extra 5% discount on top. So on that note, I guess we're going back to Saw 3. From as early as the first film, Amanda Young has been the beating heart of the Saw series, standing at a contrast with the brains of John Kramer to always create an interesting duality through which Saw's best stories are told. John is uncompromising, emotionally detached and completely sure of his actions. But Amanda is volatile, easily caught up in emotional turmoil and ridden with insecurities. And while it's made most apparent in Saw 3, the film only builds on ideas that were already established in the prior 2 installments. Amanda in the first film was deeply and obviously damaged, messed up beyond belief both by the trap she was placed in by Jigsaw and by the traumatic life she'd experienced before Jigsaw darkened her door. What she went through was undeniably earth-shattering for her, But what sets up who Amanda truly became is the last thing that she said in that police interview.
He helped me.
Despite what John did to her, what John made her do to Donnie Greco, Amanda believes John has on some level helped her or made her life better. That little seedling of belief in her betterment is the closest we ever get to the foreshadowing of Amanda's eventual fate as John's apprentice and intended successor. This faith in John is explored more completely in the second film, where she's initially set up to the viewers as some sort of belligerent and confident final girl type figure who might even become a long-term nemesis of John's, but is revealed by the end to be in cahoots with him, devoting herself to John's cause of curing the world's sicknesses one drop of blood at a time. Throughout Saw 2, Amanda's much more notably confident, intelligent and manipulative, capable of tricking everyone in the gas house and even the audience into thinking she's just another victim of the games. It's worth remembering that she isn't just a John clone though. She genuinely seems to care for Daniel Matthews and is willing to risk her life to protect him despite his father's role in her prosecution, the architect of the path to her life's destruction. At least on the surface level, John is emotionally detached from the hurt he commits, joking to Eric about his son's predicament, but Amanda by comparison cares a lot, seeming to have a more keen sense of who does or does not deserve to suffer, and doing her best to keep Daniel out of any traps, even though as a captive of the gas house, he should be tested by John's rules like everybody else. With John incapacitated throughout Saw 3, Amanda truly gets to take the spotlight in the third installment though, and this is Saw 3's strongest quality by far. The whole film is covered with her sticky fingerprints. Moments in which Jigsaw could be cold and stoic are drizzled instead with emotional agony and insecurity. The rules of the games get thrown out the window and John's calculating and precise planning gives way to Amanda's active impulse and improvisation that lead to everything going off the rails in the final act. The biggest giveaway that Amanda's playing by different rules to John is the preponderance of death traps. Jigsaw traps have either been rigged or intentionally designed from the ground up to be inescapable, contrary to John's philosophy that everyone should be able to escape their traps, and everyone deserving a chance to fight for their survival. This is a principle that's absolutely core to John's philosophy, his reason to be Jigsaw. He wants to help people help themselves, and setting somebody up to die without any way to save themselves makes you no different than a murderer. It's what allows John to insist that he's never killed anyone, to keep his hands clean. By always giving them a choice to save or condemn themselves, John keeps his conscience clear and remains sure of his actions because there are lines that he will never cross, regardless of what his personal morals will tell him. Some people might deserve to live or die, but John doesn't see that choice as something that he's empowered to make. He will always leave that choice with you to make for yourself, and it cleanses him, at least in his own mind, of responsibility. Amanda does not share this philosophy though. When she finds someone she believes deserves death, or in the case of Alice and Kerry, simply needs to die for their plan to continue, she's ready to put them in inescapable traps that would kill them guaranteed, turning the trap from a morbid game into a glorified execution. This is John's line being crossed, and the fact that it's Amanda who chooses to cross it in Troy's classroom shows a lot about how her philosophy differs from Jigsaw. Unlike John, Amanda takes the moral authority to choose who lives and dies into her hands. In some way, she believes the people in her traps deserve death, and this fits in with what we see of her life in Saw 2. Saw 2 displayed her bending the rules of the gas house to keep Daniel safe, implicitly suggesting that he doesn't need to be tested, but instead protected, even though John's logic would suggest he does need to be tested. Saw 3 shows the flip side of Amanda moralising John's games. If some people are too good to risk dying, it's only reasonable to assume that some people are too bad to risk being allowed to live. Some have attributed this to Amanda having a greater sadism or bloodlust than John, but I don't think that Saw 3 supports that at all, and I'll get to why once we get later on in Amanda's story. But for now, let's look at her first appearance in the flesh in Saw 3, how she interacts with John's doctor and her captive, Lynn Denlon, because these are relationships we get to see in more detail throughout the film. When Lynn is first captured by Amanda, it's clear that the newfound confidence Amanda displayed in Saw 2 has very much gone to her head by now, as she plays with the captive Lynn like a cat pawing around a mouse. Far from John, who doesn't tend to engage with his victims personally and rarely even lets them see him, Amanda is fully relishing the power she has over Lynn, with some dialogue and acting choices that launched 1,000 toxic ships.
Are you gonna behave?
But it all fades away when you realise why Amanda is so confrontational. so ready to let her mask of confidence and power slip when Lynn tells her she can't help John's condition. Like a switch flipped in her head, Amanda goes from power tripping to screaming and bawling, because as soon as John's in danger, the reality of the situation becomes painfully apparent. Amanda's not some megalomaniacal evil genius with everyone else as her hapless playthings, holding the power of life and death in her hands like her mentor. She's deeply desperate to get her mentor back, because despite all the power being the new Jigsaw has given her, she isn't fully ready to inherit the title yet, or at least she doesn't think she is. When it's all going to plan, yes, Amanda is theatrical and powerful and domineering, but as soon as John's condition deteriorates, she degrades into a mess while Lynn keeps her head and has to not only help John at pain of death, but also calm Amanda down enough to have her on side as an asset rather than a liability. Ironically, Lynn's a lot more capable of displaying John's clear-headed pragmatism and emotionally detached duty to do what must be done than Amanda has ever shown herself to be able to do. But Amanda, in another display of her insecurities getting the better of her, misconstrues this newfound relationship and believes in her paranoia that John has chosen Lynn over her, putting her at risk of being left on her own just as she feared would happen in the event of John's demise. It's a fucked up love triangle that Amanda ends up at the bottom of, and on some level I think this is part of John's manipulation of Amanda to test her, to see if she's worthy of inheriting the Jigsaw mantle and trusting in the plan and in his methods to work out in the end. One of my favourite parts of Saw 3 is how much is left open to interpretation in terms of John and Amanda's relationship, and this is a textbook example. Is John ignorant of how Amanda feels about his closeness to Lynn, ends up hurting her out of callous disregard for her feelings, or does he kind of know he's leading Amanda on a bit by getting close to Lynn, and intentionally doing it to see how she handles an emotionally undesirable situation, how she might cope on her own if his attention is elsewhere, or if he's gone for good? Either one is a perfectly legitimate reading of the situation, and both show us who Amanda really is. Someone deeply unstable who either needs, or believes she needs, John as a rock in her life to keep her tied down, who doesn't get caught up in her own emotional turmoil. And it's unfortunate to say, the final nightmare of Amanda's unravelling mind is probably the result of John himself and his own philosophy as Jigsaw. You know what I said earlier about every Saw film being made with a particular purpose? There's one purpose Saw 3 was made with that I think a lot of people miss when they're watching it, and understanding it I think is key to understanding Amanda's final state of mind in this movie. Part of the point of Saw 3 is to show that John's philosophy and methodology of helping people with the Jigsaw games doesn't work, at least not long term, and certainly not in furtherance of John's intended goal of rehabilitation. Until Logan in Jigsaw was retconned into being the first survivor of John's games, Amanda was the first survivor of a Jigsaw trap, and thus became John's proof of concept that his games worked. As the first Jigsaw survivor, Amanda's assertion that John helped her be better was everything he needed to prove to himself and the audience that as unpleasant as his methods were, they undeniably got results, and people who proved themselves worthy of life were genuinely thankful to John for improving their life. Saw 2 demonstrates how thoroughly this method seemed to have worked. Amanda is transformed from an emotionally broken and desperate wreck into a confident, competent and principled woman, willing and able to protect others, and there's a reasonable argument to be made that her experience in the reverse bear trap is responsible for this. She's a seasoned survivor now, nothing can catch her off guard anymore. But watching Amanda at work in Saw 3 begins to cast this image of a reborn confident Amanda into a very different light. It's clear that Amanda to start with is vocally more confident than she's ever been before, seemingly enlivened by her new life as Jigsaw's apprentice. But we've already talked about how that image starts to crack as soon as John's in danger, and it suggests to us that the sickness John tried to cut out of her, tried to make her cut out of herself, has never really gone, no matter how much Amanda wants it to be gone. Yes, she isn't a drug addict anymore, but she's also started cutting herself, and keeps doing so even as an apprentice of Jigsaw, who has tested self-harmers before for the exact same desired result as Amanda. So why did she think she was better in Saw 1? And why does she display that newfound confidence and proficiency in Saw 2 and 3 under John's tutelage? Much like the rest of Saw 3's take on Amanda, much of it's down to interpretation, but I believe Amanda's cure isn't what John did to her, but John himself, and the closer she is to him, the happier and more stable she is. It's why she's so dismayed at seeing Lynn get close to him. It's why she deviates from his philosophy so regularly and yet hangs on his every word. She doesn't believe that John's philosophy has truly helped her, but she desperately wants to believe it, because confronting that truth only reminds her of how fucked up she truly is. how much she and John have wasted their time, and how she's truly beyond saving. Amanda did get better, but not completely, and not in the way her or John intended, because John's methods at the end of the day don't work the way he thought they would. What cured Amanda, what was in the process of curing Amanda, wasn't John's methods, but simply him being there for her at her worst, not giving up on her when everybody else had left her behind, and providing her with a source of leadership and emotional care that she desperately needed. What John gave her wasn't a quick fix to remove her trauma in a few easy steps, but something much more valuable. A North Star to guide her in her darkest hour. But John couldn't live forever. He knows that better than anyone. So Amanda's test in Saw 3 was meant to help her get the closure she needed, to be able to live without him and continue his work according to the rules of the games. And you know what? Despite the fact that John's methods demonstrably didn't work on her, that they don't really work at all, it's a testament of the strength of the bond between Amanda and John that they came close. They came so close. Amanda's challenge was simple. Not give in to the paranoia or the fear or the hopelessness, to trust John's methods to see them through, and to help Lynn Denlin save his life no matter the cost. And despite the breakdowns and the fractiousness and the horror of seeing the most important person in her life in the worst kind of pain, Amanda does what she is told. Emotionally disengages just like John would have wanted, and works through the nightmare to help Lynn, to help John, to help her. It's so nearly perfect. Amanda is so close. Then she opens a letter from Mark Hoffman, and it all goes to hell. The letter from Hoffman shatters Amanda's growth in the film like glass, and while the letter's contents weren't revealed until a later film, the writer's plans for the letter were established from the beginning. Amanda was responsible for the miscarriage of John's unborn son, Gideon, and Hoffman threatened her with this information. Either Amanda would kill Lynn and intentionally fail John's last test, or Hoffman would reveal what she did, driving a wedge between John and Amanda and forcing her to abandon her mentor forever. Far from bloodlust or misanthropy or sadism, this was Amanda's undoing, and what caused the final act of Saw 3 to play out the way it does. Because no matter what, she could not imagine a world where John isn't part of her life. What saw her fail her test, what got her, Lynn, and even John himself killed, was simply she loved John too much to risk letting him go. She loved John more than she agreed with his methods, more than she could trust his plans, and if failing her test and whatever consequences that would come of that were the necessary alternative to breaking his heart and severing their relationship forever, Amanda would be willing, with tears in her eyes, to pay that price. Amanda's final breakdown at the end of the film showcases just how much everything she's been put through has unravelled her, how her blind faith in John has been punished, and how she at her core believes herself to be unfixable. She's got Lynn at gunpoint, screaming about how John can't fix her, and how useless their efforts have been with the months she's been working with him, because John's methods can't show her the miracle cure she was looking for, not realising that the cure's been right in front of her this whole damn time. Amanda put the burden of her well-being, her entire reason to exist, on John's shoulders, behaviour that he in part encouraged by so willingly becoming her North Star. But for all that reliance on him, she didn't trust him enough to let the truth come out, to call Hoffman's bluff, face the music, and trust John to forgive and understand her. And it's such a crushing thing to see, to watch John try and hold her together, knowing they've both let each other down. And that begs the question, did John know that Hoffman left that letter for Amanda? Did he know all along that Amanda was behind Gideon's death? That's the question that pervades the entire Saw series all the way up until Saw 7, and the answer is ultimately a mystery. Because if John knew Amanda had killed Gideon, that means he'd already forgiven her, that all that fear and distrust of John was for nothing. And if he didn't know, there's every chance that he would have forgiven her, and he had no idea that Amanda turned on him not out of sadism or bloodlust, but because she was terrified of losing the only thing that mattered in her life anymore. No matter the reality of the situation, whether or not John knew what Amanda did, how Amanda and John's stories end is always a heartbreaker, whether you're sad at John realising how much he'd failed his apprentice, or Amanda being put in an impossible situation because of a mistake made years ago. John's methods, his philosophy, and his legacy are all in tatters, all because Amanda didn't trust John enough with the truth, while loving him too much to risk letting him go. When Amanda shot Lynn, that was the end of all of it. It was Amanda giving up, unable to even meet eyes with John as he failed his final game. It was John's methods finally being proven as a failure. the former success story turning on her mentor despite loving him completely. It was the end of Lynn, of Amanda, of John. And originally it was meant to be the end of the entire Saw franchise, as it was the last project that Lee Winnell would write and produce for the Saw series, and that marked his last appearance as Adam Stanheidt too. It was only through studio meddling that saw a fourth film greenlit and required a few rewrites and reshoots to hold the door open for more sequels. But if Saw 3 had ended right there, and right then, it would have been an exceptional send-off to the bloody soap opera that Saw had become. Saw 3 is in every way both good and bad, a film about pain. The pain of traps that evolve to new heights of manufactured agony. The pain of the relationship between mentor and student breaking down in a hurricane of emotion and insecurities. And the less intentional but still very tangible pain of watching slow-ass motherfucking Jeff dragging his sagging metaphorical gut along this film's story like a walrus trying to run cross-country. And this means that whether or not you have a high opinion of Saw 3, it's pretty much guaranteed to leave an indelible mark on you, because a film like this just fucking hurts, man. Perhaps what hurts the most is the fact that so much of this film is so good, but to a lot of people it's overshadowed by its significantly worse successors, or by the studio that mishandled it, or even by its own weaker elements that dilute the beautiful tragic agony of the film's core narrative. But one of the biggest pain points that many fans and even filmmakers have is the decision that the filmmakers made to kill off John, because as an end to the story of Saw, killing John makes total narrative sense. He is Jigsaw, and ending the story with his death is an ultimate inevitability. He's terminally ill, and will never stop his work until his eventual death. There's really no other way to end John's story, but the greenlighting of Saw 4 and the myriad later Saw sequels make this decision seem short-sighted in retrospect. They brought him back in some capacity in pretty much every subsequent installment, so there's clearly demand for him, and Saw 10 especially has demonstrated that there's a lot more stories that could have been told about John before his death in Saw 3. But I'd argue that the film's biggest long-term mistake wasn't killing off John, he was pretty much at death's door from the cancer anyway, but rather killing off Amanda, because in Amanda the future of the Saw franchise was secure, compelling, and beckoning to be further developed. The original plan for Saw 3 involved Amanda surviving the events of the film, but decided at the last minute that instead they should go for a Shakespearean tragedy ending, where basically everybody's dead. I think this was a direly poor decision, because Amanda, living with the consequences of her choices, facing the music for all the harm she's caused and truly understanding the gravity of her failure, is functionally no different from her death. Really, when you've lost everything and everyone that matters to you, when the cause you gave yourself to is dead and buried, and you're left at the bottom of the barrel, what's the difference if your heart's beating or not? Leaving Amanda alive and hiding in remorse for the horror she's inflicted would have been just as satisfying an ending to Saw 3, while leaving an opening for future Saw movies to pick up where she left off. And the interesting part is that thanks to Saw's love of ambiguous storytelling and a convenient series of omissions, it still might. Okay, let's get down to brass tacks here. Saw 10 has showcased that John and Amanda are as popular as they've ever been, and returning to the tight emotional storytelling that characterised their relationship in Saw 2 and 3 has resulted in the most critically successful Saw film of all time, with the highest box office taking of any Saw film since Saw 3D. People love John and Amanda, they elevate Saw films that they are in significantly, and the future of the franchise in Saw 11 and beyond likely revolves around them going forward, as opposed to copycats or successors like Logan or Shank. And with that in mind, it's important to remember that Amanda is never explicitly, irrefutably confirmed to be dead. At least nowhere near as thoroughly as John is. The last we see of her is lying on the floor of the Gideon meat plant, but that's really all we've got. She's never carted off to the coroner like John, never verbally confirmed to be dead. The closest we ever get is the assumption among cops that investigate the later Jigsaw murders that Amanda isn't involved. Logically, if she was still missing, she'd be expected to future Jigsaw activities, but she never is, so she must be dead, right? I would not be surprised if at some point in the near future, Amanda will be brought back from the dead, or more accurately, brought back from the assumption of death to take over as a modern-day Jigsaw and leave the franchise in the capable hands of Shawnee Smith going forwards. It wouldn't be the worst retcon Saw has ever had to do to justify the existence of a modern-day Jigsaw. All it would take would be a brief scene of someone with, I don't know, a combination of all the medical experience needed to save a life, and a good motive to save John's most devoted apprentice, and continue the work of Jigsaw, stitching her wounds and nursing her back to health, and suddenly Amanda Young is back to her antics again at the front of the Saw franchise, ready to tell new modern stories set long after John's death. I know a twist like this would divide fans, that much goes without saying, but I think that's a price that many would be willing to pay to see the Saw franchise available to finally move on out of John's shadow without totally divorcing itself from what came before. Saw 10 and presumably 11 fit into the gap between the Saw films, but those gaps won't be unfilled forever. Unless they want to try the Jigsaw strategy again and weld another Apprentice into the mix, or the Spiral strategy and cut ties with the predecessors altogether, something like this seems inevitable if the franchise is going to continue for the long haul. But if this long haul means more Amanda, more Gordon, more Logan or Shank, or even just no long haul at all, I think it's fair to say Saw 3 has shaken the Saw franchise to its core. Its highs are grisly and spectacular, with perfectly agonising traps as a backdrop for some of the strongest character work Saw has ever seen, while the lows grind the film to an almost unwatchable halt, as Saw's most frustratingly useless protagonist blunders through the meat plant like a lethargic bull in the world's most painful china shop. Without Saw 3, Saw would not be what it is today. And whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll leave that up to you. Well, I hope you enjoyed my little video on Saw 3, it's been way too long in the making. The next video will be looking at Alan Wake's integration into Dead by Daylight. So if you don't want to miss that, then please do the little subscribing move. And on Tuesday the 13th, my other Discord server is going to be doing a movie night to watch Repo the Jurassic Opera before the video I'm doing on it later in the month. Down in the description you can find a link to that as well. And who could forget the sponsor of today's video, Extra Wallets. If you're interested in picking up a snazzy new wallet, don't forget my creator code PIXELBUSH or to use the link in the description to get 5% off your purchase on top of any current sales. And I guess on that note, I'll see you next time for Alan Wake. See you then.